Hello and welcome back. I'm sorry it's been a while since I've done a video. I took a vacation with my family and it was super nice to relax. But I'm back with a few videos for you over the next couple weeks. Today's video is about dimensional sentiments. This is such a fun way to get more looks out of any products you may have. This involves stretching a sentiment across some dimension. The dimension can either be cut out stamped images or even die cuts. So you can see how the sentiment really is incorporated into your stamped or die cut pieces. It's a really cool look and works with just about any stamps and dies you may have. Let's start with this example first. I used the Altenew Sweet Rose Bouquet stamp set and coordinating dies. Now this stamp set looks pretty complicated. You see all of those small images, but the great thing about this is the flowers are clustered together on one stamp. So you can stamp them all at once, which is fantastic. And then you just add the leaves to it. So it doesn't take long at all, and you end up with these beautiful, small, detailed images. So I'm using my MISTI stamping tool today simply because it is super helpful when lining things up. But you can use an acrylic block if that's all you have, or any stamping tool. Here I have the large leaf image and the large flower image, and I'm just putting them together and laying them onto my cardstock to plan where I want this to end up. I'll remove the leaf image and start with the flowers. You want to start with whatever you want to die cut and pop up on your card. Now for these flowers, I'm stamping with super light ink today. I want my final layered rose to be light so that when I stamp a sentiment over it, I can still see it very, very well. So instead of just stamping with my lightest ink, which is Altenew Rose Quartz, I'm going to do second generation stamping. So I ink up my stamp it off on scrap paper, and then stamp it onto my white cardstock for my card. And since this is such a light ink, this second generation will be super light. You'll barely see it. So I'll repeat that process 3 or 4 times until I end up with a light image, but still am able to see it on my card. So you can see the light image there, really beautiful and soft. Now that first image was the most solid flower layer. Now I'm going to the one with a little bit less solid look to it. And I'm following the guide that is on the Altenew packaging. This time I'll use the exact same ink, which is the Rose Quartz, but I'll just stamp it right away. So I'm using the first generation for the second layer. So you can see how soft and light our rose is ending up. Now on for the third layer. For this one, I'll use the second lightest ink, I should say. This is the Puffy Heart Altenew ink. It's a beautiful pink color. Since this is the third layer, I will start by doing a couple or 2 or 3 layers of second generation stamping. Ink it up, stamp it off on scrap paper, then stamp it onto our paper. So I end up with a soft color. Now I'm coming in for the 4th layer of the stamp with the same ink, the Puffy Heart, and just stamping the first generation on it. So there we have 4 layers of color, all just from 2 inks, and the results are very soft. Now for the sentiment, I'm using the Altenew Dearest Friend stamp set. I've used this one before in videos, and the sentiments in here are really great. There's a good variety in there, and I seem to reach for it often. So I use the Dearest Friend from there. Then I use the Altenew Wings of Hope stamp set. There's a sentiment in here that says, "You've got this and I've got you," and I thought that was a great encouraging message. So I'll use those 2 sentiments together. Altenew makes it very easy to mix and match sentiments from different sets to build something special for the front of your card, or even use some on the inside. So I've laid my stamps onto my cardstock piece here, just to kind of plan out where I want the sentiment to be. I'll remove that leaf stamp, I was just using it for positioning, and I will put my 2 sentiments down. Now I want to make sure that this is straight. So I have my little L-shaped piece from my MISTI Creative Corners. This is very helpful in making sure things are lined up. Saves me a lot of time too. And I just kind of push the stamps along the edge of that L shape to make sure they're straight. And then I close the MISTI door on it. And I take the L shape out, and now I have a straight sentiment. I'll stamp it right over my roses with black ink. Any black ink would work for this. You want to make sure that it's a darker color sentiment so it shows up across our stamping. I added some clear embossing powder and heat set that so it has a bit of shine to it. Next, I'm using the coordinating dies to cut out our roses. By cutting these out before we do the green leaf stamping, you get a cleaner cut image, which you'll see in a moment. After I ran that through my die cut machine, I can just set the little flowers aside for a bit, and now I can do my stamping of the leaves. For my first stamped image, the most solid one, I stamped with the Frayed Leaf Altenew ink, which is a light green ink. I like to heat set my ink before moving on to the second generation. I don't always show that in videos because it takes time away, but by heat setting and completely drying each layer of ink before adding the next layer, you end up with more crisp results because the inks don't want to bleed into each other if they're still wet. So by heat setting between the layers, you end up getting better results. I did complete the stamping of the leaves by adding the other layers in green ink. Now it's time to put the card together. I couldn't find the exact color of pink cardstock to create the note card, so I inked it up with the rose quartz ink so I knew it would be a perfect match. My stamped panel is trimmed down to 4 by 5 1/4, and the card that I'm putting on is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. You want to make sure that ink is dry on the note card before you try to adhere, so that the adhesive will stick nicely. Now for the roses, I'm going to add those with some dimension so that they're popped up. The sentiment will stretch across these popped up roses and the flat background piece, which really creates a cool look. So this is a pretty simple technique, and you don't really have to add anything else to the card, since there's a lot of interest with that sentiment being dimensional. You can also see how this technique can be used with many of the stamps and dies that you already have in your stash. It's a great way to give it a new look. Now my next example shows how to do this technique with a background die. I'm a big fan of background dies and showing new ways to use them. This one took a little bit of time to do, but I think it was definitely worth the effort. For this card, I used the Altenew Everything About You stamp set. I really like the sentiments in this one and that it's bold. So it works really well for this technique where you're stamping across little die cut pieces or across color. It keeps it standing out nicely. I'm also using the Altenew Spring Shower cover die, which is a favorite of mine that I've used in videos in the past. I'll first die cut that from white cardstock and we'll set this aside. We'll need to use this later. Next, I have the Couture Creations double-sided adhesive. This is a thicker double-sided adhesive that when you die cut it, you end up with like a sheet of stickers. So I'm adding this to the back of a piece of white cardstock. So when we die cut this later, it'll have the adhesive on the back. Now onto this piece, that white cardstock with adhesive on the back, I will stamp my sentiment. I already have my sentiment in my MISTI. I'm choosing to stamp it again with black ink and clear heat emboss it. That helps to make it stand out, but you definitely don't have to heat emboss if you don't want to. Now I'm going to stamp the same sentiment in the same position onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card. So I'll end up with two pieces with the sentiment in the same place. One of them is a note card and one of them is that white cardstock piece with adhesive on the back. Next we can die cut that adhesive back piece. So I'm putting my cardstock right onto the die, and then I'll run that through my die cut machine. After I've run it through the machine, I end up with what's like a sheet of little stickers. Now there are a lot of pieces to this. That's okay. I enjoy it. I think it's therapeutic to put these together. Now onto the note card, I will temporarily tape that white die cut piece that we did at the beginning. This is just going to be a guide on where to glue all of those little flowers, where to add them onto the card. So I'm not gluing it permanently there. That white negative space will come off later. Now I'm taking all of the pieces from the left and putting them into the card on the right. So all of those little die cut pieces with the adhesive on the back, I will just pop into the negative space on our note card. This took me about 45 minutes to pull together, but it's definitely fun to do. So by using that negative die cut space on my card, I know exactly where to position each flower. That's especially important around that I love you sentiment, because you want the sentiment to line up. After I have all of my pieces in place, I'm putting the release paper onto it so that I can press my bone folder across it to really press all that adhesive onto the note card. To add color, I'm just using markers to quickly color the pieces. It doesn't matter what it looks like around the pieces because we're going to remove that negative space, which makes the coloring faster to do. If you wanted to save time on this technique, you could have just done like a rainbow of ink blending across the background piece before you die cut it. Then all the pieces would be pre-colored. But I wanted to color each of the pieces individually. And this technique really didn't take that long. Once you have the pieces colored, you can carefully remove that negative space. So once I remove the negative space, all the little flowers will be adhered onto my note card, and my sentiment will line up perfectly across all the little pieces and the note card. If some of the little shapes didn't stick, that's okay. You can move them and press them down nicely when you're done. Finally, I finished this off with some pearls. I didn't transfer all the super tiny die cut pieces. I didn't want to take the time to do that. Instead, I filled in any empty spaces with little pearls. And there you can see the sentiment that stretches across that die cutting. And there's something about that little bit of dimension that's beautiful. And I really like the look of that heat embossing across it also. Okay, so that's a way you can use this technique with your background dies. Next, I wanted to show you how to do this technique with layered die cuts. So this one doesn't have layered stamping, but rather die cuts, so it's a little different. I'm using the Altenew layered rose dies. You can see there are 3 layered pieces for the rose and 3 layered pieces for the leaves. I use some scraps of colored cardstock, but you could also ink the cardstock if you can't find the colors you need. For the sentiment, I'm using the Altenew Blooming Bouquet stamp set. That large, bold hello is perfect for this dimensional stamping technique. In my MISTI, I've placed my white cardstock piece, and I've just put down the rose and the leaf where I think I want it to be, so I could position my sentiment. I'll remove the die cuts and start by stamping the sentiment onto this white cardstock. This piece is 4 by 5 1/4, and it will fit nicely on the front of a card. I'm double stamping this just to make sure it's a nice crisp black and heat setting it so I don't smear it, which is something I do often. Now I decided I wanted to add just a little interest to the background, so I'm using the Altenew Dotted Scallop Background die. This die actually just pierces a bunch of tiny little dots in a scallop pattern, and I thought it'd be fun for the back of this. Next, I'm starting with the leaf. I'm positioning the leaf exactly where I want it on the card. I'm using some Altenew adhesive to place it down. Once it's in position, I'm using that same stamp in the same position, stamping it with black ink, and you really only need to stamp on the leaf, so you don't need to ink up the whole stamp. Now I'm putting down the flower, and I'll ink up my stamp and stamp that. So now we have it across our bottom layer of the leaf and the bottom layer of the flower. Next, I'm adding the second layer of the flower. So I'm putting that right on top, and I'll stamp again. And each time it's lined up perfectly when I stamp it. That's the advantage of having a stamping tool, just one of the many advantages of having a stamping tool. So then I'll stamp that. Now it's time for the third layer of our rose. And you can see how nicely that layers together. And now that hello is stretched across all the layers. At this point, I realized that I forgot the other layers of my leaf, so I carefully removed the rose and did the stamping on each layer of the leaf, just like I did on the rose. Now that Altenew adhesive is great because you can temporarily adhere something by only using a little bit of the adhesive and then use a little bit more of it to hold it permanently. So before I add my rose on, there are some places that the ink didn't really fill in very well. So I'm just going in with a black fine tip pen to kind of darken some of those areas, but I didn't have to do much. Next, I'm adding our background onto a white note card. I left the leaf just adhered to the card, and I used foam adhesive for the rose. Finally, I'm using some strong liquid adhesive to add some of the Lucy's Cards iridescent jewels. These particular jewels are great because they pick up the color of anything on your card, so they seem to match everything. You can see how cool that sentiment looks stretched across all those layers. I think it looks better with the hello on top of this little rose instead of below it. I feel like it's kind of unified there. and it really works well with this particular stamped rose, but it would work great with any layered dies that you may have. Okay, I have a couple more examples of using your stamping and coordinating dies with this technique, and these step it up. Here you can see that the flower and the leaves are both popped up off the card. So I wanted to show you how I did that. It's similar to the first technique, but I changed it up a little bit. I'm using this gorgeous Altenew Build-A-Flower stamp set. I like their Build-A-Flower sets because it's a large stamp set and the coordinating dies sold together. Now for this one, I went ahead and stamped the sentiment already. So it's in my MISTI and I stamped it with black ink. And I'm starting with the flower first. Now when you do this technique, whatever you want to be popped up the most, you want to start with. Now when you're doing like a cluster of flowers, that usually means the flowers are done first and then the leaves. If say you're doing a little person with clouds, you want to do the person first with the clouds second. So I went ahead and stamped all the layers of this flower. It's very easy to line up. I again used soft colors so that my sentiment would show up nicely. Once I was done, I used the coordinating die to cut the flower out. And I'll set that flower aside. Now it's time to do the leaves. I'll again use soft colors for this and just stamp right onto this. Now I'll be stamping over that open die cut flower area, but that's okay. This gives a nice layered look once we're all done. Now here you can see I am hand cutting these leaves. Now I could come up with some crazy reason why, but I simply cannot find the leaf dies on my desk. What you don't see in this video is around this whole work area is a hot mess and those dies are in there somewhere. So I just hand cut those leaves out because I thought that would take less time than finding the dies, which I end up finding later when I cleaned up, but I apologize for that. I then used adhesive, some foam tape, to add the leaves in place. Then I'm using 2 layers of foam tape to add the flower so that the flower will be popped up more. You could do 1 layer if you want, but I love that extra dimension. And I just line those up with the opening, and I added a few pearls, and you can see I put that on a pink note card. There you can see that large sentiment stretched across all the dimension along the flat card, the dimensional leaves, and then the super popped up flower too. This is a great card to make for lots of different occasions. You could stamp different sentiments under hello and even do it in different colors. Now my last example is a crazy one with lots of die cutting, but it's another way to do this technique. For this example, I used the new Altenew Build-A-Flower Hibiscus set. So this is another one of those sets where it has the stamp set and the coordinating dies sold together. I'm also using the Altenew Farmer's Market stamp set. Believe it or not, I use this one a lot because of the kindness sentiments. I like the style of these sentiments and the different kindness messages that you can put together. And it's nice and bold, so it's perfect for this technique. Now this time I'm doing this technique a little bit differently, so this is another way to do it. I went ahead and did all of my stamping and all of my die cutting before I put the card together. So you can see how beautiful the layers stamp to create these little flowers and these little leaves from that hibiscus set. And I cut them all out, so I have a bunch ready to go. I also stamped my kindness sentiment and left the sentiment in my MISTI. Now I'm arranging the flowers on top of my little panel here, wherever I want them positioned. And I'm using that Altenew adhesive so I can put them down and remove them and move them around if I want to. Notice I also used a few shades of green ink so that I could have different color leaves for some added fun. Now once I've figured out where I want everything to be, I'm starting by putting down just the leaves. Then we can stamp over these leaves with the black ink so the sentiment stretches across them. So it's still positioned in my MISTI, stamp it again with black ink and it lines up nicely. Now I can add my flowers and then I can stamp again. Now what will be different about this way of doing it is that when you kind of peek under the die cuts when they have dimension, you'll just see white. You won't see the color of the note card showing through, but it's an easy way to do it and it still looks nice. Once I have all of my stamping done, I can go ahead and add all of my little pieces. Some of them aren't underneath the sentiment, so I don't need to stamp on them. And I'm adding some of the leaves with just regular adhesive so they lay flat on the card. Some with the little foam squares so they have a bit of dimension, and some with doubled up foam tape so that they have a lot of dimension. I really like varying the amount of dimension that you get with the different pieces. And each time I make sure that the sentiment lines up nicely. When I'm done, I put adhesive on the back and added it to a yellow note card and trim the excess that's hanging over the edge. So for this card, we have our sentiment stretched across, lots of stamping and lots of dimension. When you peek from the side, you just see white. You don't see the yellow note card underneath. That first example that I showed you is where you die cut out the shapes from the panel itself so that the background note card peeks through. Both techniques are great. Just kind of play around with it and figure out which one makes the most sense to you. But as you can see, you can use this with pretty much any dies or stamps you have. Now I have 2 more cards I want to quickly show you. I have a drawer in my craft room where I keep extra stamped or die cut pieces that are left over from other projects. I went to that drawer and found this little flower and leaf. I don't even think they're from the same stamp set, but I put them together for a quick card using this technique with that sentiment stretched across it. So this is a great technique to kind of grab extra pieces and make a quick card. And by doing this technique with the sentiment stretched across, it adds a little interest to it. Here I had a leftover leaf, and I just gold heat embossed sending love and hugs across it. By doing that sentiment across it, it adds interest to this very simple card, but I really like the look of that single leaf, and it just happened to be a leftover, so this took me no time at all to put together. Okay, so there you have it, a bunch of examples for using dimensional sentiments on your cards. I hope you'll give this a try. I think it's one of those things that you can use often when you're not sure where to put your sentiment on a card also. I appreciate you spending time with me today. In the description below, I have all the supplies that I've used. You can also go to my blog for lots of photos and more information. In the middle are a couple other videos that might be of interest to you that are kind of related to today's video. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I will see you again soon.